For those that don't know, our lead pastor, Justin Jordan, has been on sabbatical for the past month and a little longer. He'll be gone all throughout September and be back for our fall launch in October. And so we've been having guest speakers come in and speak and to help cover while he's been resting with his family and getting time away. And so I started last week, kind of going through September. So you've got me through most of September. There'll be one Sunday where I don't talk, but 4 out of the 5 I'll be sharing with you. And so one of the things that we have been going through as a series is this Hall of Faith discussion, where we have been looking at different characters in the Bible and working through different things that we can draw from those characters and what we can learn from. And last week I shared quite a bit, talking a little bit about Hebrews 11, this chapter that's kind of organized around highlighting these people of faith and talking about them. So we talked a little bit about like what faith is and kind of narrowed down this idea that faith is this word trust. Our ability to trust God in the now and our ability to trust God for the future. And so we worked through that for quite a bit, and I was told it was quite a lot of information, a little bit of a fire hose coming at you, and I'll tell you, I don't know how to do it any other way, because when I talk about the Bible, I get excited, y'all, because it is the coolest thing out there. I mean, it is. There's nothing on earth like the Bible and what it does and how it's changed and impacted our world. And so I just love it. I love talking about it. I get excited about it. And so I don't know how to hold it back. So I'm going to try to slow down, though, okay? Because I was told every Thursday we do what we call a sermon run-through. And so whoever's speaking that Sunday, we do a run-through on Thursday just to get feedback from the team, our staff team. And one of the things that Jenny told me this last Thursday is, Joe, slow down. All right, this is good stuff. Slow down. I'm like, okay, I got to slow down. So I'll do my best this morning. As we continue on our conversation, we're going to look at the book Esther. We're going to look at the book Esther this morning, and we're going to work through some key ideas in Esther. And so this first part we're going to look at is this concept of left behind. No, not the Tim LaHaye left behind. It's a different kind of left behind that we're going to look at this morning, and I need to set the stage for us. So if you'll permit me, we're going to do a little bit of history. All right, can we do some history together, all right? Because to know the history helps us with this book. And so we're going to set the stage with a little bit of history. First, let's talk about this nation Israel, okay? So when David comes on the scene, King David, right? David, Goliath, David, he unifies all the tribes that were existing that made up Israel at this time to make them a one unified kingdom. And that kingdom was stretched in that land of Israel where he ruled. And so he brought together all these tribal nations and brought them under one rule. And that lasted through his son, Solomon. So you have King David, David passes on, Solomon takes the throne. And when Solomon takes the throne, he builds the temple. This is a huge moment for the nation of Israel where they have a central location where they go to worship Yahweh. And so this is during King Solomon. Well, when Solomon dies, you get a succession of different kings, some good, some bad, that kind of make a mess of this unified kingdom. And what happens is that there's a lot of fighting between the tribes, and eventually this one strip of land gets divided into two parts. There is what's called the northern kingdom, and there's the southern kingdom. And so it's like a civil war, and they just split. And there's a north and there's a south. And the northern part is called the Kingdom of Israel. I know it might be confusing because sometimes we just think of that whole strip as Israel, but at this time, the northern part was called Israel, and the southern part was called Judah. Okay? And that's how it was divided. The northern kingdom of Israel had a capital city of Samaria, and Judah, the southern kingdom, had a capital city of Jerusalem. Okay? So this civil war happens and it gets split. Well, at the same time where this is happening, and there's these northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and they're all kind of fighting against each other, there are other powers that are at play around them, other kingdoms that are existing that come to power and rise to power. One of those kingdoms was the kingdom of Assyria. Assyria was a nation that when they just took over the known world, and they were quite brutal. And so the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom in roughly 720. And so the Assyrians, they come in, and this is kind of what it looks like. This is the region that they conquered. They come in, and they were a force to be reckoned with. They were absolutely brutal when they took people over. And so you can see that their kingdom kind of comes down, but it doesn't actually get into the southern region. They kind of stay north, and they conquer the kingdom of Israel and the capital city of Samaria. They take it over. And what they did was so brutal that we actually don't have a record of what happened to the northern kingdom. The Jews living in the northern kingdom, they were just scattered out. They were taken back as slaves, many of them killed. And historically speaking, we actually don't know what happened to them. We don't know where they went. Because the Assyrians were so brutal in their conquest, they wiped you off the map. And this is what happened. And so they were brutal. They did a lot of things. They wiped it out. Well, eventually, a new power comes into play. And this power is the Babylonian Empire. And so we know this story, right? We know King Nebuchadnezzar, and he comes in. And so the Babylonians, they finished the job. So where the Assyrians stopped at the northern kingdom, the Babylonians come in, and they're even bigger, and they're even badder, and they actually take over more of the region. Their kingdom kind of goes all the way down. And so this is a story that we get in much of the Bible of the destruction of the temple, and you have the exiles. And so during this reign, the Babylonian Empire, they take a portion of the people that they conquered in Jerusalem, because the northern kingdom was already kind of scattered out and wiped out. So they come down, they take over Jerusalem, they sack Jerusalem, and they take a group of those people and they export them into Babylon. And so this is where you get that like Daniel story and Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, the three friends of Daniel. And when the Babylonians took you over, they did something different than the Assyrians. The Assyrians would wipe you off the map. They were just brutal. They didn't care. The Babylons, they went, well, let's utilize their very best, and let's incorporate. Let's not just completely wipe them out. Let's utilize some of their best people and incorporate them into our culture. And so when you get to the book Daniel, you have Daniel, which is a Hebrew name. His birth name was changed to Belteshazzar, which is a Babylonian name. You have Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, which are all Hebrew children names, and their names are changed to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These are Babylonian names. So they're brought in, and then they are incorporated into the culture of Babylon. So that was different when it comes to like military warfare in the ancient world. That was a new thing that the Babylons were doing. They're like, we're just going to bring our best in. But they left a remnant behind. And so that took place. Well, while they're in exile, while they're in Babylon, a portion of the Jewish people are in Babylon, they're in exile, a new power comes in to play. And so there's a transition of power while they're in exile. You have Cyrus the Great, the Persian king, who comes in and he conquers Babylon, and he inherits all of the things that Babylon had done, which included the exiled Jewish people. He inherits them into his kingdom. And these guys were so big. Like, you thought the other empires were big? This is what the Persians did. Like, they took over the known world. They were the biggest, baddest army that the world had ever seen. And they did things even more different than any other military power before them. When the Persians would come into your town, and they were going to take you over, they would march up with their giant armies. They just had the biggest army in the known world. They would march up to your city, and they would send an ambassador in, and they would meet with your king, and they would go, hey, FYI, we're at your door, and we can just wipe you out. But that's a lot of work and a lot of money on our and to waste all those arrows and potential soldiers. Like, we can just wipe you off the map. How about you just surrender, and we'll let you go about your lives like normal. You can worship your gods if you want to worship your gods. You can live life the way you've always lived it. We only ask that you serve our kingdom like in allegiance, and you pay taxes to us. And so because their army was so big, this is how they conquered so much land, is there were just a lot of kingdoms that went, yeah, we tap out, because there's no way we can fight against you. And so this is how it happened. So what's brilliant about this is where Cyrus the Great, he inherits these group of Jewish people that are living in Babylon, and he goes, hey, I don't care if you guys worship your God. Why don't you guys just go back? And you can rebuild your temple, and you can do your thing. Not a big deal to us. You're going to still be a part of our kingdom, like we will rule over you, but we don't care what you do. And so he allows the Jewish people to head back. And so they return to Jerusalem, and they rebuild the temple. This is the stories in Ezra and Nehemiah, those books in your Bible, where a group of them come back and they go, all right, let's go. And they take a group of people and they try to rebuild Jerusalem that was destroyed by the Babylons, and they try to rebuild the temple. And so this is the stories that you get here because of Cyrus. He lets them go. So during the time of Cyrus, there's a succession of kings in Persia. The succession goes from Cyrus to Darius to Xerxes. And Xerxes comes to power. And when Xerxes comes to power, this is the story that we get the book Esther. So it's going down the line. Cyrus is gone. Darius takes power for a little while. Then he's gone. Xerxes takes power. Enter in the story Esther. This is where we pick up the story. This is almost 100 years after their exile, when the Babylonians exported the Jews out. It's about 100 years after that period. And the book Esther takes place over the course of 9 to 10 years, which is fascinating because it's 10 chapters long. You can read it in 10 minutes, and it actually takes place over 9 to 10 years. So the book Esther is a writing about Jewish people who stayed in Persia as others left to return home to rebuild their city and temple. And so, if you're reading the text with curious eyes, and you're trying to like ask questions, which is how you should read the Bible. You should read the Bible asking questions. One of the questions I ask when I think of the book Esther is about a group of people who stayed behind. They didn't go back to Jerusalem. So the question I ask is, why stay? Why did they stay? Why were they left behind? So much of the Jewish story is wrapped up in the temple, in Jerusalem. So much of what we think about when we think about the Jewish heritage and story, it's all about Jerusalem. It's all about temple. It's all about what's happening over there. And yet you have a story in the Bible about the people that are hanging out over here. Why? Why do we have that? Were they disobedient? Did they not care about their heritage? Why didn't they go back? And so when I think about that and I go, why didn't they go back? I think of people like Nehemiah. Nehemiah is a guy that you can read his story where he gets permission from the king to actually go back and rebuild the temple. He has a calling on his life. He's like, I need to go. And Ezra's like, yeah, we'll support it. And so these guys, they go, and their mission is to take as many people as they can to actually reclaim their heritage, the temple, their homeland. But not everybody had that call. Not everybody had that same mission. What about those who stayed behind? I think about, moving on here, sorry. I think about those who stayed behind. What about those who didn't see themselves as that part of the story? What about their story was different than the one that was about rebuilding the temple? What about those who woke up and went back to work the next day? You know? This is where we get Mordecai. This is where we enter in. But I just want to sit on this for a second. Did God care about them? Where was God at with those people? The people who stayed behind. The people weren't like, well, I got a job here. I can't just quit my job and travel to Jerusalem. Like, I'm here. Like, I'm not called to go back. They stayed behind. They were left behind. What about those people? Does God care? Does God see them? Does their story matter? We celebrate the people that go, we have a big calling on my life. I'm going to go change the world. And they're these big, grandiose things. And that's great. And we can celebrate that. But then there's the rest of us that goes, well, that's not my calling. What about me that's just here? I'm just trying to be a good employee. I'm trying to be a good father. I'm trying to be a good friend. I'm just here. What about us? Do we matter? Does God see us? Does God care? And I think the book Esther answers yes. Yes, he does. Enter Mordecai. Mordecai. As we think about this character, Mordecai, there are three main characters in the book of Esther. We're not going to go through the whole story. You can read it on your own. Like I said, it's about a 10-minute read. Real easy to do. But we're going to look at a couple of the characters, Mordecai, and we're going to look at Esther. And we're going to pull out some observations about their lives that might be applicable for us here. But as we enter in this story, there's one thing, again, if you're reading with curious eyes, you're going to notice about this story, is that the name of God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. No trace or mention of God. No idea that he's involved anywhere. No activity of God. Nothing there. It's a very odd book in that it's in our Bible, and yet it actually doesn't even talk about God. We like stories where God's on display. We like the parting of the Red Sea. God clearly did that. We like the fire. We like these big grandioso moments where God does something big. And then we come to Esther and we're like, where's God at? Where's he at? He's not even mentioned. In fact, he doesn't even speak. He doesn't even speak. Nowhere does Esther or Mordecai ever hear from God. God doesn't tell them to do anything at all. There's no vision. There's no dream. There's no parting of the clouds where God goes, hey, this is what I want you to do. Go do that. No, it's just two people trying to do their best, caught up into a story where evil is all around them and they're trying to figure out what to do about it. That's what this story is showing us. Just two people trying to live each day going, okay, I got to figure this out now because it's getting crazy here. No mention of God. It's very interesting. And yet, God's hand is at work through all of it. Last week, now let me explain how. Last week, we looked at the character David. And to understand how God's hand is at work, we've got to go back. So we looked at the character David. There's a story about David when he's older. He's been king for a while. He has sons. And one of his sons, his third son, Absalom, is starting a revolt against his father and trying to take over to be king. And so there's all this turmoil happening, and David has to flee Jerusalem and to get out because his son's starting all this mess. And so David takes off with a bunch of his men and flees Jerusalem. And in 2 Samuel chapter 16 and 19, we're introduced to a character. And his name is Shimei. Shimei is this guy. Shimei is a guy that comes from the line of Saul. And so he's this dude that's introduced, and he's a relative of Saul. Saul's the guy that, was the previous king and didn't like David, so there's bad blood because David took over. They didn't like each other, so Saul's family really doesn't like David. And so here we have this guy, Shimei, and from the line of Saul, and there's a lot of bad blood there. So the story goes that what's happening is Shimei is standing outside the road where David's fleeing for his life. Shimei in 2 Samuel 16 is standing on the side of the road waiting for David to pass. And the story goes, he picks up rocks and throws them at David. He picks up dirt and he throws it at David as he's walking by. And so he's hurling, and then in the meantime, he's hurling a bunch of curses at David. He doesn't like David. And so he's actually like, get out of here. He's cursing at him. And his buddies that are seeing this, David's buddies, like David's not doing anything. He's just taking it as he goes, walks by. And David's friends are like, hey, we should go kill this guy. Like, let's go kill him. Look at what he's doing. And David says, no. We're not going to do that. David says, look, let him curse me. Maybe God will use this somehow, but let it go. So David's going the high road here, right? He's like, forget about it, doesn't matter. And they continue on. And the story goes, so that's 2 Samuel 16, this guy Shimei, and you're like, okay, what's this guy about? Well, he pops up again in chapter 19. Now, a few chapters later, Absalom is dead. David is coming back to reclaim his throne, so he's back in power, and there's lots of celebrations, and they're going back into Jerusalem, and everybody's partying, and it's a great time, and look who shows up on the scene. In 19, we get this dude, Shimei again. And this time his tone has changed, all right? Because now he's asking David for forgiveness. He's like, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have done that. Oh, it was terrible. So now that the power is transferred, like he's like, uh-oh, I made a big mistake. And so he's going to David like, I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? All these things, right? And the soldiers that are with David again, they're like, look, we just need to kill this guy because he's no good, right? Like, let us go take care of him. They want to kill him. And David says, no, don't touch him. And he makes a vow to Shimei that he will not kill him for what he had done in chapter 16. So he makes this vow, I will not kill you. Now, why are we talking about Shimei, right? Why are we bringing up this dude way back with David? Because in Esther chapter 2, we're introduced to the man Mordecai. And this is what it says about him. It says, now there was in the citadel of Susa, which is in Persia, a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai, son of Jair, the son of Shimei. Oh, now that's interesting. He's a relative, he's a descendant of Shimei. And what's interesting about that is that in this moment, we're clued into, if we're paying attention, a connection. If David hadn't spared Shimei's life, we would not have the person that would actually be the one to bring deliverance for the Jewish people at the time of Esther. If you know the story of Esther, the king makes a vow that he's going to kill all the Jews on a certain day with Haman. And so Mordecai becomes this guy that's instrumental in actually saving and delivering the Jewish people. Had not David shown him mercy, we would not have Mordecai. And here's the crazy thing about this. God is at work. Even when we don't see it, God was working long ago in preparation for something that was happening in that moment. And that's how God works. God's always at work. Talked about this last week. God's always at work doing something, somewhere. And he's using you to make that happen, whether in the present or in the future. Let me explain from a personal story. There was a period of time where I had gotten out of ministry, and I was just working at a painting company. A good friend of mine, Mark, he owned a painting company. He said, yeah, Joe, come on in and help me be my operations manager. And so I came in, and I was working there, and that was before I came here. I had been working there I worked there for about a year before I came on staff here at Real Life. And I thought I was going to just be doing that forever. We were going to grow this company. It was going to be this big thing, and I thought that was my future. Early on, when I went to go work there, Jane and I, in our marriage, we were struggling. The way that we communicated is that we hit a ceiling for knowing how to help ourselves. Meaning that, like, the ways that we had conversations, we didn't know how to have better conversations to actually take a next step in our marriage. We were really struggling. The same fights over and over again, different day, but the same thing essentially. I'm not hearing you, you're not hearing me, and we're at each other, right? So I go into work, and this is early on when I went to work there. I go into work, and Mark is a friend of mine, and so he's like, yeah, things go. I'm like, it's just, you could just see I was a little down and just gotten in a fight with Jane, and he's like, have you guys ever considered counseling? Marital counseling. And I'm like, well, we've thought about it, but we just don't have the money for that. We can't, it's not something we can do right now in our lives. And he said, no, you guys need to go get some help. He says, and I'll pay for it for an entire year. I'll pay for it the entire year. And then after the year, you guys need to take ownership and do it yourself. And so, like, that gesture right there, you need to know, changed everything for Jane and I. Like, not simply is our marriage healthier than it's ever been because we actually got help learning how to communicate, learning how to exist together. After 20 years, guys, like this wasn't year one of our marriage, right? We got the help, and not only that, I got help because there were things inside of me that were broken, that I have been ignoring, not understanding, that I learned to deal with. And it actually made me a healthier person, which then in turn made our marriage a healthier marriage. Guys, it changed everything. It saved our marriage. It saved me. This gesture, years ago, this little thing, you guys need help. You know what? And I'll pay for it for the first year. Changed everything. Do you see that this little moment of mercy for David, which probably felt like nothing, God used to save an entire nation generations later? The little things that you do when you partner with God may seem little to you. You have no idea how God can use that in the future. God is at work. Just as he uses David to pave the way for the future generations, he uses you to prepare the way for those yet to come, or the immediate action like in the lives of Mordecai and Esther. He's using you. God is at work. And the question we got to ask ourselves is, are we willing to partner with him? Will we partner with him? I love what Mordecai challenges Esther in Esther chapter 4. Esther's made aware that the king's got a plot against the Jews. And so Mordecai goes to Esther and says, hey, we need to do something about this. And Esther's hesitant. She's like, I don't know if that's my place to do anything, right? I don't know if I can get involved. In fact, if I go talk to the king and he hasn't asked me to come and talk to him, he will kill me. So I just don't know that this is wise. And this is what Mordecai says. And I love this. I love this so much. If you keep quiet about this time, liberation and protection for the Jews will appear from another source, while you and your father's house will perish. He's basically saying, like, you can not do anything. God's still got a plan. He's still at work, y'all. Like, he's still going to make his plan come down. And you may, like, actually suffer for it. Like, you and your house may die, but God's in control because God's at work. But then he flips the script on her, and he says, it may very well be that you have achieved royal status for such a time as this. He goes, look, God's at work. He's going to take care of it. But maybe you're in the position now for a reason. Right? He doesn't tell her what to do. He doesn't say, you got to do this. You're betraying your people if you don't step forward. He's just going, maybe this is why you're where you're at. Maybe this is your position, like, for a reason. Mordecai lives in this reality. This is what I love about it. He lives in the reality of what it means to trust. Trust in the now and trust in the future. So Mordecai says, look, I believe God, the future is God's. His plan's going to unfold, whether you get involved or not. But the reality is that God is at work, and he wants to work in you. And so maybe you're at where you're at right now for a reason. And this is the reality that Mordecai lives in. And his challenge reminds us that God is always at work, and perhaps you're in your current situation so that he can work in you right now. God's always at work. And maybe you're where you're at right now because God wants to use you right now. And you go, well, what do you mean? I don't have this big calling. No. David just said, no, I'm not going to kill you. And he moved on. One simple act of mercy, God goes, I can use that. Let's go. That's all I needed. Let's go. Your simple act of, hello, how are you? Looking at someone in the eye and saying, demonstrating I care. I'm glad you're here. Can change the course of someone's life. Y'all, just being kind to someone who's had a rough day can change the course of someone's life. You have no idea. God doesn't need much, y'all. He doesn't need much. He just needs someone to go, yeah, I'll partner with you. I'll partner with you. So that's Mordecai. What about Esther? Have you ever wondered what you have to offer? Have you ever wrestled with, like, what is it that I can bring to the table? I don't have anything. I'm not powerful. I don't have wealth. I'm not well connected. I don't have anything. I just show up and do my thing. What do I have to offer anybody? I think when I think of Esther, I think of someone who might be wrestling with that reality. I think to some degree we all have imposter syndrome, where we feel like we don't fit or belong, or that we're like a fish out of water, like, I don't know if I should be here because I'm not like them. A lot of people come into church and they feel that way, imposter syndrome. I don't know, I'm not like these guys who know how to worship and pray, and boy, they must know their Bibles back and front, and I'm just sitting back here like a big dummy not knowing what's going on. Imposter syndrome. Listen, we're all big dummies because we're all learning and growing together, right? Every step is a new step towards growth and maturity in Christ. You're not alone. You're not an imposter. And I think of Esther, and I think she was just one woman. And what's interesting about her story is that she was one woman that was up until the later part of the story of Esther, from like chapter 4 and 5 on, she was a product. She came to power because the previous queen wouldn't parade around at a drunken party from the king. She said, no, I'm not going to do that. The king banished her. So then he had this big kind of like beauty pageant. And he saw Esther, and he's like, I like her. She's where she's at because she's a product to be used in the story. But you see, the thing about Esther, she's so much more than that. She is so much more. We find out in her story that she's a manager. Early on in the story, we find out she's put in charge of other people and over an entire household. So she's managing people. She's magnetic. People are drawn to her, not just for her beauty, but people like being around her, we're told in the story. She's wise. She has an ability to discern how to move and how to do things, like knowing how to play out the rest of the story. In like chapter 6 and 7, you see wisdom in her. She's loyal. When she goes before the king to remind the king about what Mordecai had done for him, she's loyal to Mordecai. She's compassionate. We find out that when Mordecai's mourning the decree to kill all the Jews, she has Mordecai and brings him in and wants to understand why he's sad. She's spirit-led. When they devise a plan to do something about it, she says, we need to fast and pray. Which is the closest thing we get to any spiritual connection to God in the story. She just says, we need to fast. We need to pray. She's spirit-led. She's brave. To go before the king unannounced was certain death. She's brave. She's bold. When they have the party, the final party to reveal the plot that Haman had set up, she calls him out by name. She's bold enough to name him right in front of everybody. She's bold. Esther is much more than a product. And can I just speak to you women in the room right now? And maybe even you young women. You are much more than this world says about you. You are more than a product. You are God's beautiful image, created in the image and likeness of God, to actually bring about his good in all of the world. You are more than what this world says about you. You have something to offer. You have something to bring to the table. You are God's image, created in his likeness, to be the kinds of people that moves the kingdom of God forward. God wants to use you. You are not a sideline character in the story of the Bible. You are a featured player. Esther was a featured player, more than just what the people around her were saying. For those of us who struggle with that self-doubt and fear that our lives, and maybe even we, don't matter, the story of Esther actually says you do. You do matter. Esther calls us into a deeper faith and invites us to believe that no matter how difficult things become, God is committed to us. God is committed to his good world for such a time as this should reverberate through our ears. Is this the time? Is this the time? We are called to trust. We are called to trust in God's story even when we can't see it at work or don't fully understand what's happening. Remember, we read this story in like 10 minutes. This took place over 9 to 10 years that this event unfolds. It wasn't just a 3-day thing. God moves slowly, systematically through the course of history to bring about his good. Do we trust that? Can we put our trust in that? Even when we don't see what's going on or we don't hear his voice and we just wake up and we're trying to figure out day over day over day, what are we going to do? Will we trust him? God is at work. God is at work through you. He's at work through you in your household, at your place of work, with your family, with your friends. He's at work everywhere, all the time. And the story of Esther shows us that he's just looking for people that will raise their hand and go, yeah, I'll help. I'll step up. I'll take a next step. So as we wrap up this morning, in the send-out is going to be the exact same send-out I gave you last week. Because I really actually want you to sit in this reality. I want you to sit in the reality that God is at work and that God is at work through you. God is at work through you. So this is the same send-out that we did last week. There are 2 things I want you to pray every single day this week. The 2 things are this: God, give me eyes to see what you're doing this week. Where you're moving, what you're up to. God, give me the eyes to see it. And then, Lord, second prayer, give me the courage to step into it. I actually want you to pray that. How many of you prayed that this week? I don't know, I don't want to embarrass you. But, you think I'm joking? Pray this prayer every week and see what God will do. I actually literally believe that God is real. I literally and actually believe that his son is real and alive and resurrected and wants to move through the world, through us. This isn't just something, this cute little thing that it's like, oh, look at me going to church. No, I actually believe this stuff. It's real. God wants to use you. He's always at work, everywhere. Will you have the courage to step into it? Pray that prayer and watch God open doors. Put a smile on his face and he'll go, oh yeah, game on now. I got a church full of people every day praying, give me eyes to see. And God goes, yeah, I'm over here, I'm doing this. And a bunch of people that are bold enough to go, yeah, okay, I'm going to go over here, right? And remember, any prayer where you say, God, show me what you're up to, will always be revealed in an opportunity. Okay? So when you pray, God, show me what you're up to, it will look like an opportunity to do something. That's where the back end, give me the courage to do something about it, right? Because when you go, God, help me see what you're up to, all of a sudden you're going to see that coworker that just seems a little bit off today. They're just a little bit down. They came in maybe 5 minutes late. They just kind of went right to their desk. And that's an opportunity. Hey, how are you doing? Seems simple. Oh, what's that going to do? I don't know. Ask David when he was like, we'll let him live. What's that going to do? That's up to God. Right? Maybe it's your kid. And you're just seeing your kid a little off. And you take a moment, you put your phone down, you turn off the TV, you sit at the table when you eat, and you go, how are you doing? How was your day? What was something that gave you life today, that made you excited? What was something that made your heart hurt today? I care about you. See, opportunity. There'll always be an opportunity. I want you to pray that prayer. So as we get ready for communion, we have our ushers that will be moving their way forward. If you did not receive communion on your way in, you can lift your hand and they will get you communion as they work their way to the back of the auditorium. Just flag them down. They'll get you some communion. And during this time, I want us to reflect on the reality of what God may be inviting me into for such a time as this. And to begin to wrestle with God about, do you actually have the courage to step out and do something about it? So let's sit in that moment and let's let God speak to us, because I believe he's here. And I believe he actually wants to talk to you in your heart, in your mind about these realities. Let's do that now for a minute. On the night that Jesus was betrayed, he took bread, he broke it, he blessed it. He said, "This is my body which is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Thank you, Jesus. He then took his cup and poured his drink. He lifted it and blessed it and said, "This is my blood which is poured out for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in remembrance of me." God, I know that sometimes it can feel like we don't have anything to contribute, that we're imposters in this story. We don't belong or we don't fit. Maybe we even feel like we've been left behind, that you're doing something great without us. But the reality is that's just not true. The story of Esther reminds us that you're at work everywhere. And the work you've been doing even precedes us. And if we can partner with you, we can continue that story going forward, because it's a good story. And God, I just pray that this week would be transformative, that we would see the ways in which you want us to step out in faith and trust and partner with you in what you're up to. I pray, God, that our jobs, our homes, our schools,